Hello, I'm John Molesky, and this is Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Today, my guest is Stephanie Bowen. Stephanie is editor of the award-winning Wilson Quarterly, and the new issue is now available, the spring 2023 issue. And as she does when every issue is released, Stephanie joins us to talk about it, and we feature an author, and that author today is Zoe Robbin. Zoe is a Fulbright Research Fellow in Amman, Jordan. She's contributed to Al Jazeera Foreign Policy, and as I mentioned, the current issue of the WQ. Her article is entitled Trading Water for Sun: How the Abraham Accords Opened the Door for a Green Energy Exchange Between Israel and Jordan. And we'll learn more about that and Zoe in just a moment. But first, Stephanie, if we could begin with you to provide us with an overview of the issue. The title of the issue: When Goods Cross Borders, Is the World Ready for a New Trade Agenda?
Thank you, John. It's always so great to be here with you to talk about the spring issue. As you said, it's about trade, and it follows issues that we had on strategic competition and supply chain. So I think this issue really brings the three of those topics together because they're so interrelated. We cover subjects from all over the world. We have esteemed contributors such as Ecuador President Guillermo Lasso. We have the UAE Foreign Trade Minister in a Q&A with journalist Afshan Molavi. I'm sorry if I butchered his name. And we have Catherine Ashton, Baroness Catherine Ashton, who does a terrific Q&A with Robin Quinville about the trade, the need for trade to really help Ukraine rebuild after the war. And I think, as we'll hear later with Zoe, we have a great subset, I think, on the Abraham Accords and how the normalization agreements have opened up economic activity in the Middle East. Some of those include Zoe's piece. We also have a terrific piece from Michael Kugelman about how India has really benefited from the Accords, and they're not even a signatory country. So that's a nice snapshot, I think. There's a lot more to delve into. Great reported pieces from Northern Ireland on the heels of the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday agreements. As those folks are navigating Brexit, we see how the two kind of intermingle. And we've got great reporting and analysis from Africa, Indonesia, Uruguay. It's really a lot of terrific work from Wilson Center scholars, reporters, and other contributors.
Well, and you know I'm a big fan, but I will say this issue in particular is particularly rich, and you always feel a little smarter after reading the WQ, I have to say. And you mentioned your esteemed contributors. I just made me think, a little digression. What's it like to edit a head of state or a former head of state?
You know, the first time I did it, I was really nervous because I wasn't sure, what I could do. And then I just had to remind myself, that we all want the best product out there. We want to make sure that their ideas are getting across in the most effective way. In this particular instance, I brought in Benjamin Gadan of our Latin America program because there was some English.
So you could blame him. You could blame him.
Well, there was some English to Spanish translation that I didn't want to, rely on my high school Spanish to get us to the most eloquent points. He really did help a lot, and it always is a little nerve-wracking, but at the end of the day, you do feel smarter, and just that nice collaboration is is always there to remind you that we all have our own unique jobs to help bring the ideas forward.
And speaking of people who make us feel smarter, Zoe, welcome to the program, and thanks for your terrific piece as well. Zoe, if we could begin, why don't you give us just the background of what the water situation is between Israel and Jordan?
Sure, and thanks so much for having me, John and Stephanie, for working with me on the piece. The water situation is pretty dire in this region, in Jordan and in Israel and in the state of Palestine. There are very, very limited ground and surface water resources. So this is the Jordan River Basin area. And climate change is really putting a lot of pressure. So it's taking a situation that's already pretty bad, and with temperatures rising, precipitation going down, it's making it even worse. Now, Israel in some ways is preparing and has been preparing itself for the climate situation that we're encountering. They have developed a really, really strong desalination capacity along their coast, whereas Jordan doesn't really have as much desalination capacity. So for Jordan, the water situation is a lot more dire. It's a lot more acute, and farmers are really feeling that. And people in the cities are really feeling that too. There's water rationing here, and people are forced to rely on some more expensive sources of water too. So they're really looking for different options to try and ensure that life can continue stably here.
So tell us about the construction of the deal between the two countries and what they'll be trading.
Sure. So the deal says that Israel is going to construct a desalination plant, and then water from that desalination plant is going to be exchanged with Jordan. And Jordan is going to have a solar field within its territory. And the rationale behind this is that, first of all, Israel does have a better desalination capacity. And Jordan, on the other hand, has the ability to produce solar power at a lot cheaper rate than Israel. And what's really interesting about this, and where the Abraham Accords kind of come into play, is that the UAE is going to be supplying the solar technology for the deal. So Jordan actually wasn't a signatory to the Abraham Accords, but they're kind of having this ripple effect, because they're enabling the UAE to come in as a interlocutor and with its technology and kind of make the deal happen.
Will there be any talk about them becoming official members, signatories of the deal, or is working through the UAE just good enough for them at this current moment?
Well, Jordan and Israel have normalized relations since the 90s. And so they have been at peace. But the issue is that they've been, very, very tumultuous at times, particularly related to issues related to water and the environment. And so I think where the UAE comes in is, first of all, providing the technology, but second of all, serving as this partner that's trusted by each of them. So the three of them have signed an MOU at COP, the climate conference that we just saw, indicating that they're going to be moving forward with the deal. So I think it's a really positive development for both Israel, which is trying to increase its use of green energy, and Jordan, which really doesn't have enough water.
And the UAE as buffer and deal maker.
Exactly.
Stephanie, over to you.
Yeah, so not everyone is in favor of this deal. Can you talk a little bit about the opposition?
Yeah. I think where the opposition is probably strongest is in Jordan. So when this deal was first announced back in November of 2021, there was actually a parliamentary walkout and there were protests in the streets. And I think people are really focused on Jordan becoming more reliant on Israel for its water. And this does kind of harken back to similar issues that Jordan has had when it has relied on Israel for resources. So in one example, in 2020, Israel actually began pumping some gas from its offshore fields to Jordan. And people campaigned in Jordan against that under the slogan, "Gas of the enemy is an occupation." So I think we're seeing a very similar dynamic and a similar anxiety with this deal.
Is the opposition a threat to the deal, or is the deal solid?
I think two things. First of all, the monarchy negotiated this deal, so it kind of went through without consent from any elected officials here. And the second thing is that Jordan is really coming from a place of desperation. So this deal could increase Jordan's water supply by about 20%. And that's huge in Jordan, which really doesn't have water. And so if the deal doesn't go through, I think the risks are probably a lot more intense and could be a lot more acute than if it does.
Stephanie, the subtitle of the issue that raises the question: is the world ready for a new trade agenda? Is this the type of deal that you're invoking when you talk about new agendas and new formulations of trade agreements?
Exactly. It's exactly really thinking about trade in a different way. And we're coming, at this also with the realization that there has been some, backlash to globalization, and really thinking a little bit differently about what might be possible when countries and regions come together for different deals. And I was curious, Zoe, you came to this as someone who's working on an environmental issue in Jordan, or environmental issues in Jordan. What did you learn through, your reporting and talking to people that might show what's possible in other regions of the world when it comes to these types of arrangements?
Yeah, so for my reporting on this, I spoke a lot to folks at EcoPeace, which is an NGO organization, and they are having offices in Jordan, Israel, and the Palestinian territories. They're the group that really orchestrated this deal. And it was really interesting to learn about how they came up with the idea for it, to have Jordan trading water for solar power. One of the things that I found really interesting is also some of the ways that they have not been able to realize their vision. So one of the things that they're advocating for is for the Palestinians to be involved in this deal as well, and to essentially set up new environmental infrastructure that could set the stage for a two-state solution. Unfortunately, that isn't how the deal has progressed. And I think a lot of Palestinians who do not have water and who are facing, some pretty dire economic impacts, this is a telling sign that they weren't included.
More about that, when you look at necessity as the mother of invention, you can understand why a deal like this happens. One side needs water, the other side needs power. But when you raise the Palestinian question and a source of ongoing tension and conflict within the region, does this have the potential to have an impact on the politics of the region beyond the practical nature of the deal? In other words, are Arab leaders approaching Israel and the Palestinian Authority any differently as a result of this deal, or do you see potential for that kind of evolution of relationships?
Yeah, talking to the EcoPeace folks, I think that's what a lot of environmentalists on the ground here want, is for people to begin approaching Israel as a partner and as a technological giant in the region that could help other countries and help Palestinian communities around it. Unfortunately, I don't think that has been the case. And I think the fact that Palestinians have been left out of the deal, even though the desalination and power will really be right on the borders of the West Bank, is very telling as to how both Arab leaders in the UAE and Jordan are sort of viewing the Palestinian issue and viewing the likelihood of a two-state solution coming about. I think the most important thing right now is probably to ensure that the Palestinian economy doesn't get any worse in terms of water. So right now, Palestinian agriculture is in a really, really poor state, with thousands of square kilometers of land that are just lying dry because they don't have access to water. So this is a really acute issue. And I think Palestinian communities are reaching a really intense point of desperation.
Stephanie.
Yeah, I guess, my other question for you is about when we were talking about how to end the peace, and you were saying how the jury is really still out if this is, going to work. Can you just talk about that a little bit more, and sort of what the vision is from those working on this and hoping to bring it all together?
Yeah. So I remember that conversation that we had, and it's important to remember that this isn't the first, major water infrastructure project that's been proposed to help Jordan. So one of the ones in the past that's been proposed was the Red Sea, Dead Sea project, which had planned to provide Jordan with drinking water by providing this canal that was going to go between the Red Sea and the Dead Sea. This idea went through tons of iterations, tons of back and forth between Jordan, Israel. The United States was talking about it for a while. And ultimately, the entire project was abandoned in 2021. And so I think people are sort of holding their breath and a bit worried that this deal could fall through as well, especially with the added diplomatic complexities with it. Dr. Mohammed Mahmoud, who I also interviewed as part of this piece of MEI, wrote a really, really excellent piece in 2021 about some of the practical and engineering challenges associated with this deal. And so I think, you know, from a political standpoint, it's complicated. From a technical standpoint, it's even more complicated. But at the same time, I think folks at EcoPeace, environmentalists on the ground here, are thinking that, you know, we need to try. There needs to be some solution here to ensure stability in the region.
The article quantifies the amount of energy and water that is traded from each side. 2% of Israel's energy needs met by this solar energy, and 20% of Jordan's water needs met. I know that's apples and oranges, but what can you tell us about sort of the relative need on both sides and how equivalent or not this deal is?
Yeah, so the deal is much more acutely needed in Jordan than Israel. For Israel, even though it's only 2% of their energy, I think what it's helping them do is to diversify their energy sources and also to rely on sources of green energy, which is really important to them. They do have a lot of desalination capacity, and of course, that uses a ton of power to do. So if they can develop more sources of power and also more sustainable sources of power, green energy, these things are really, really good for them and good for the region overall. With Jordan, it's more of an existential crisis if this deal doesn't go through, with 20% of water potentially coming from it.
Will there be, will people look closely at this deal, and is it a possible template for future deals if it goes well?
Yeah, I think so. You know, one of the great things about it is that it's an exchange. And so instead of a treaty where one side is agreeing to give a certain side something, this is a trade where both sides have something to gain and they have something to lose. So it's kind of this added level of stability that I think a treaty wouldn't really have. You know, cross-boundary water issues are very complicated, and they're also very liable to fall through. And so I think setting up some sort of exchange is really a framework for the future.
Stephanie, looking at the broad array of deals and situations that the issue looks at, what do you observe in terms of this changing landscape as far as, you know, I mean, whatever the old paradigm was, China didn't loom as large as it does now in trade deals, in global trade deals. And the U.S. was the economic juggernaut. And now things are changing. And the U.S., while inconsistent, has often attached its values to any trade negotiations or trade deals, where China takes a less judgmental, perhaps is one way to phrase it, approach. What are you seeing across the landscape, and how this situation in Jordan and Israel factors into it? Give us that sense of the broader picture.
Yeah, I think what really comes through when you know, read the issue from start to finish and kind of take it all in is that, you know, we need to have an open mind to what might be possible, and to just think about trade in a different way. And I think that the Abraham Accords and the pieces that we have on the Abraham Accords really show that there are new possibilities, and the U.S. can either engage or not engage. If the U.S. chooses not to engage, there's going to be a consequence that other people are engaging in these types of exchanges and trade relationships. And you can see too from our previous issue, just the amount of activity that is happening around the world, the trade, whether it's from, physical products, water for energy, these types of things are happening with or without the United States. And so I think that what this issue is trying to show is that that new trade agenda, as the tagline says, really is should be open for discussion. And I think we end the issue with a Q&A with me and Jeff Cusick, who is a scholar working on inclusive trade and other. He really, I think, from the Ambassador Green's forward, putting a personal touch on how he views trade, to Jeff's Q&A with me about how inclusive trade might heal some of those wounds of globalization, really kind of bring it together to just demonstrate how the world is shifting, and the US can be a part of this in a positive way, where trade is fair, but that doesn't mean a lack of engagement.
Zoe, I want to give you a chance for a final thought on this larger question that Stephanie just addressed as well. You mentioned a few times that certainly advocacy groups, particularly environmental groups that you worked with and interviewed for your piece, have visions of this being a template for something that can have implications beyond the mechanics of any deal. What about within public opinion or political leadership? When you were covering this story, do you see any movement in those arenas?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opposition initially to this deal on the ground here in Jordan, but I think people and the environmentalists who are working at EcoPeace are doing something that's really brave. They're doing something that a lot of their families might not support, but they're doing it out of necessity and out of this belief that ensuring water resources reach Jordan will ultimately serve to stabilize and improve life here in the future. Going back to Stephanie's point, this is something that the U.S. has been involved in and is supporting a lot. So John Kerry, the climate envoy, attended both of the initial signing and the MOU at COP27. And so I think they also see the potential for this to promote peace and stability throughout the region.
Zoe, thank you very much, not just for today, but also for the terrific contribution to the current issue of the WQ.
Thank you for having me.
And Stephanie, before we close, please tell our viewers and listeners how they can read the issue. And I know there's a subscription option as well. And if you're ready, you can give us a preview of what you're working on next.
Sure. Yes, you can get the issue at wilsonquarterly.com, where you can also subscribe. It's complimentary, and we send out quarterly emails with the new issue. Our next issue, we're doing a combined summer-fall issue, and it will be looking at Africa. And that's all I will say. It's going to be an exciting issue.
Great. Look forward to it. Zoe, this is something I like to do. Put the editor on the spot and ask her what she's working on next when the ink, the digital ink, the virtual ink hasn't even dried on the current issue. And I ask her to look ahead. But, it was great. The two of you gave aspiring writers a view behind the curtain, too, when you talked about your exchange over the article. I hope they were paying attention, those of you who aspire to write for the WQ or other such illustrious publications. Thanks, both of you, for all your time and all your insights.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
And to our viewers, take advantage of it. Again, I feel smarter every time I read an issue. I guarantee you will too. It's nobody's making money off this. This is a public service from the Wilson Center. And so read the Wilson Quarterly and join us again for another edition of Wilson Center Now. Until then, for all of us at the center, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for being here.